Welcome back, Canada Catholic. Sorry, Josie, I didn't mean to scare you. So turns out that it's a little bit of weather out there. So we didn't have school today, but remember I told you yesterday that if something happened, that we were still going to have a flip. So here comes that flip, all right? Now, we left off in class talking about Hernan Cortez and his destruction of the Aztec Empire under Moctezuma II, actually, is his number. But I know a lot of kids are usually going to be like, well, I read somewhere that he wasn't even there when it all went down. This is actually true. Whenever like Moctezuma himself actually died via a strike in the leg, possibly a rock, we're not really sure because there's a lot of different accounts. He wasn't actually even there because Cortez was disobeying a lot of orders being there in the first place, right? Like he was told specifically not to go, and that's why he burned his ship so he couldn't leave, right? So this guy, though, is responsible, though. We still credit him as being responsible for the destruction of the Aztecs, and they would fight off the Spanish, but then they would come back, and they were decimated by smallpox. But now we're moving on to a different civilization, right? So notice we haven't hit, like, upper North America yet, because there aren't any very, very big native civilizations there, right? There are a lot of nomadic native tribes there, like Cherokee, Lenape, Apache, Shawnee, a lot of different things like that. However, they're not as large scale as the Aztecs, so they don't receive as much historical storytelling as the rest of these other tribes do as well. So we talked about the Aztecs. So there's another very big civilization down in South America in present-day Peru in the Andes Mountains, and they're called the Inca, right? Inca, I-N-C-A, okay? So they are very similar in a lot of ways to the Aztecs and then very different in a lot of ways from the Aztecs as well. So the Incas are very different because like their entire city setup was very different. There's one very famous city that you've probably seen pictures of, this place, Machu Picchu, which is one of their religious areas, and then built as such. They would actually build on top of mountains, and they had a steeped farming system. They had thousands of miles of road. They had actually pioneered brain surgery at one point. The biggest and craziest things about them, though, is that they had like no written language. They actually had the system of knots tied on strings called quipus, and they actually did domesticate one animal. They domesticated the llama, but they still never had any forged metals, much like the Aztecs, and they had no large beasts of burden because the problem with the llama is it can only carry about 60 pounds, right? So the guy that was sent to take over them and take all of their prized possessions and their gold is a guy named Francisco Pizarro, right? So Francisco Pizarro, who I believe is a cousin of Cortez. Let me double check that really quick. But he wants to take over the Inca and claim their treasure and their gold and things like that because he's a jerk, right? Pizarro, Cortez, cousin. Pretty sure they're cousins. Mother and Pizarro through his mother. Yeah, they're second cousins. Yeah, so now, Spanish adventurer Francisco Pizarro, cousin of Cortez, wants to take over the Inca. Now, here's the thing. Pizarro had a huge trek that lasted over a year to try and find these people because they're in the mountains and areas like that. Along the way, did he do the same thing that Cortez did and make alliances with the people outside of them in neighboring areas? Of course he did, right? Did he also make alliances with other native cultures that maybe weren't quite as big as the Incas? That's the big difference, right? So the Incas were in competition with several other like smaller base cultures that were around them, whereas the Aztecs would take over people, and they had this big thing called the Triple Alliance, and then they would actually tax the neighboring towns and villages to profiteer, or not profiteer, but for them to hand over people for sacrifice, right? Now, the Incas are very different, though, and they actually were very low in numbers because they had just got done fighting a civil war, right? And the civil war was all over a thing called political legitimacy, right? It was over the idea of who is going to be their ruler because two men claim the throne. And the guy who ends up winning is a man named Atahualpa, right? Atahualpa, King Atahualpa, right? So the crazy thing about Atahualpa is, though, is he had heard of the oncoming Spanish, right? Same as Moctezuma II. He knew they were coming, right? He heard that they were on their way, and he had heard things about them, right? However, Atahualpa, due to the fact that there's no written language in the Incan, culture, they had no real way of transferring direct information. So Atahualpa didn't know as much about the Spanish as the conquistadors, or excuse me, as the Aztecs did. And the crazy thing that ends up happening is at this place called Cajamarca, right? This entire scene, he's actually captured, right? Because King Atahualpa is going to like be captured. There we go. And let me tell you the whole story, right? This place called Cajamarca, Cajamarca, a platoon of about 120 Spanish foot soldiers with about 60 mounted cavalry, right? And some records claim that they also had native allies with them, decided to assemble at this Incan city called Cajamarca, right? Where Atahualpa's armies were actually set up on a ridge nearby, and they had just been done fighting this entire, like, civil war, right? So they decided, though, Francisco Pizarro, being a jerk and being super smart at the same time, decides he's like, look, the Incas don't know anything about us. So what we're going to do is we're going to hide, right? And there was a square, like much like this square around my face, right? So they were like, we're going to put a legion of horsemen here, a legion of horsemen here, a legion of horsemen here, and we're going to leave this opening right here open. So when Atahualpa processes in after we send an emissary to go get him, it doesn't matter how many people he brings with him because we're going to ambush him, right? And then some people are like, well, wait a minute. They have like 8,000 people, right? Like, we've got 200 guys. We're going to lose even if they just try to bare-knuckle brawl us, right? Well, Cortez says, or not Cortez, then Pizarro says, well, we need to capitalize off the element of surprise, right? And so he gets a bunch of bells, and then he tells all these, like, and they only had 12 guys with guns. They had 12 guns. The Spanish had 12 guns, and they were able to defeat an 8,000-member number of Inca, right? So what they decided to do, though, is they were like, all right, wait for my signal, right? And so when Atahualpa processes in, he's got 8,000 people with him. They're all coming in their big cloth armor, and they're only carrying like very, very simple weapons like clubs and bolas. Bolas is like, it's a rope with like 3 balls tied to the ends of it, right? So they can like whip it around and then throw it. So they're only carrying those things with them. Now, when Atahualpa processes in, he's on top of this thing called a litter, all right? Like, he has been carried on other people's shoulders, okay? And so he is above them because he is believed to be one of their gods, right? So what ends up happening is the story goes that a friar, this guy right here, a Franciscan friar, walks up to him, to Atahualpa, to present the Spanish to them. And he says, you know, basically, here is the tome and the testament of our God and your God, and hands him either a Bible or a letter. We're not really sure. But the thing about it is Atahualpa cannot read Spanish, doesn't care to. And their Bible would have been written in Latin, even, which is even worse. And so he looks at it, and he throws it to the ground, right? And after Atahualpa throws the Bible onto the ground, the Franciscan friar like yells something at him. That's the signal, and then the Spanish swarm on top of all of them, ringing bells, firing guns aimlessly into the like sky, shooting cannons, and the entire Incan population is freaking out, trying to protect their king or trying to disperse. And 2,000 of those Inca are going to be put to death, and the rest are going to be taken as prisoners. Atahualpa himself is ripped down off of his litter, and he is also taken prisoner as people dyingly try to keep him above them on their shoulders, right? Crazy, crazy story. Now, King Atahualpa originally is going to refuse Christianity or to be controlled by the Spanish. That's at that battle, right? He like refuses it by throwing that Bible to the ground. And so the Spanish are going to kill thousands of the Inca and demanded a ridiculous ransom for him, right? So Pizarro says, all right, you want your king back? You just fought a whole civil war for him. How about you give us a ransom for him? Pay us 1,000 pounds of gold, right? And they show up with it. The Inca actually paid this ransom. And originally, Pizarro decides he thought he was going to keep Atahualpa alive, but they decide to kill him anyway, right? They actually even forced him to convert to Catholicism, right? Atahualpa converts to Catholicism, takes on a Catholic name, and then he is put in this thing called a grotto or a giotto, which is actually where they have a chair, and he's like latched to it like this, and a leather strap went around his neck, and someone's pulling on a leather behind him, or on a lever behind him, and they strangled him to death. Like, how brutal is that, right? And so they're going to kill Atahualpa anyway, and upon taking over these large empires, the Spanish are going to begin to set up their colonization. So now we're entering the second phase of the exploration era, right? We talked about the age of exploration, discovering these new things. Now we're moving into the era of colonization, where they're going to start setting these things up. Like the Spanish are going to set up gold and silver mines, and they're going to use their new wealth to become Europe's richest and strongest power. Native populations have no choice but to either convert or give in, right? So, and well, actually, they just kind of gave in. And then, like, just like these two are just giving in right now, just rah, 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 rah. Sorry, that one's Josie, and then that one's Rufio. All right, so they're big, big babies. Now, anyway, what we're going to get after now, it's been about like 10 minutes, all right? Give me 5 more minutes of your time. We're going to talk about the era of colonization. We're just going to get into it a little bit, right? So what we're talking about now is the era of colonization, right? So write that down in your notes, the era of colonization, right? Because here's the thing. We're here now, so now what, right? So the Spanish were not about to destroy the Aztecs, destroy the Inca, and then just kind of cut ties and run, right? They realize that there is wealth to be had in these areas, right? And they're driven by 3 particular motivations that every single history teacher, including college professors, love to talk about. So go ahead and jot this down. God, gold, and glory, right? They wanted to spread their faith, make that money, and try to create the dominance of the Spanish Empire, right? So Spain, by the mid-1550s, claims a vast empire stretching all the way from the top of California all the way to the bottom of South America. Now, there's one area that they didn't claim in South America. It's this big chunk of territory right there called Brazil. Now, the big reason why, though, is because it's a very densely packed rainforest, right? This right here, the borderline, is the Amazon River. Because Pizarro, when he came in to take over the Inca, he actually entered in around Panama and then went down into Peru and then took over this entire area spanning south. Cortez took over this area called the Mexica Empire and then took that over and then expanded north, right? Now, originally, up until the mid-1500s, they didn't even own this portion yet. They actually acquired that after a war that we're going to talk about much later. And they also own this area over here, the Philippines, right? They are furthest stretching eastward and like claim with the Philippines, named after Philip II, one of their monarchs that we'll talk about later. Now, a big thing they want to do is spread Christianity, right? Because here's the thing. To the Spanish, let's go ahead and skip that. Don't write that. To the Spanish, winning souls for Christianity was just as important as winning land, right? So after they had done a lot of diabolical things and kind of like strangled a king to death and then made sure one of them died via a rock and then like, spread disease and killed a lot of people, the Spanish are going to be using their Catholic faith to work to convert the natives. They're going to build churches. Now, a big thing that the Catholic faith did so smartly and so good out of like the kindness of their faith, right, and the positivity of their faith, is they're going to regulate the Spanish settlers. Because let's look at 2 particular instances where it wasn't necessarily the leader that did the wrong thing. It was actually the people that they brought with them, right? Columbus, right? Columbus's colonists were actually much worse than Columbus ever was. And then second of all, Cortez wasn't even there when they decided to take Moctezuma prisoner, right? It was the people beneath him. So big thing that the Catholic Church is going to do is they're going to try and regulate these Rufio, stand up for yourself. All right, so see, I'm trying to regulate these like little colonists over here. All right, now, anyway, we're going to keep going. So then they're going to seek to control trade, right? This is that growing that gold aspect, right? We just talked about our God motivation. Now we're talking about our gold motivation, okay? So they're going to seek to control trade. Now, the most valuable thing for Spain, of course, was gold and silver, right? Raw money, gold and silver. So they're going to set up mines all over the place, right? They're going to discover some other things while they're there, like tin, aluminum, things like that, but they don't really know how to use it quite yet, all right? Now, this right here is the average Spanish silver mine, right? Now, obviously, from looking into this thing, there's no way that I would go down there. It's very, very dangerous. It's dark. There are no, like, actual safety, like barriers to try and keep this thing from collapsing in on itself. Gas pockets can be hit. Explosions can happen. Poor ventilation. They actually used to hang birds at the top of them called canaries, right? And they would hang a canary up there, and if there was gas filling up the thing, the canary would die, so they knew to hurry up and get out of there, right? So now, well, that's much later, but I just like that story. Now, this is another big thing that the Spanish are going to be actually discover while they're there. We talked about this with the Portuguese, right? They're going to find out that they can actually grow certain items in North and South America now. And so they're going to try and set up colonies and ship raw materials out. Now, what a raw material is, jot this down over top of it, is an unprocessed good, right? An unprocessed good. Things like different foods, so vegetables and things like that. Cotton, sugarcane, right? Now, cotton comes in much later, all right? Sugarcane is the big Spanish cash crop, all right? Sugarcane is used to make a lot of different things. It made a ton of money at the time. Molasses, sugar, rum, all different types of like products. However, sugarcane's got to be grown on large plantations, so they need as many workers as they can actually possibly get a hold of, right? So sugarcane actually comes out of the ground looking much like, well, that's a sugarcane plantation. That's for much later, but it comes out of the ground looking like this, right? So what they originally do is they don't actually, I'll tell you what, we're going to stop right there, right, at the idea of the sugar being a huge cash crop in Spain, all right? Very good job today. Proud of you guys for doing your work on a snow day. I'm going to send this out via email, and I'm sure all of you will actually see it pop up because you're subscribed to the channel. But I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day off. See you guys later.